let us continue with our second panel titled Israeli-Jewish-Christian Relations in Crisis. Unfortunately, there have been a number of changes in this panel. So due to technical difficulties, Moti Imbari's video message will not be available today. And also to our biggest regret, Father Agan Kochikian's flight got cancelled, so he will not be able to join us today. Nonetheless, let's welcome our panelists. Dr. Jürgen Bühler will be joining us through video message. And in person, we will have Péter Kovács, Professor Dr. Tbar GRL, and Péter Morvai. The panel will be moderated by Logan West. I ask all of you to join the table.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Logan West, and I'm a research fellow here at the Danube Institute, and I would like to thank all of you for coming back for our second panel. Our next panel is titled Israeli-Jewish-Christian Relations in Crisis, and we will be taking a look at the state of intercommunal relations between the Christian community and the Jewish community, which has seen a flare-up in recent months in an accompaniment to the current conflict. We will first begin with a video message from Dr. Jürgen Bühler, and I would like to also remind all of our panelists to please keep their comments to 15 minutes so we have as much time as possible for questions. Thank you.
Shalom, dear friends at the Danube Institute in Budapest. Thank you so much for the invitation. My dear friend Sharon Sugar, thank you to Daraba. And greetings here from Jerusalem. I wish I could be with you in person in Budapest, but unfortunately this current crisis does not allow me to be with you at this wonderful conference. The question I was asked to answer today, are the Jewish-Christian relationships in Israel in a crisis? Now I want to say it from the beginning, the loud and resounding answer to that question is no, they are not. As a matter of fact, I want to quote here the late president of the State of Israel, Shimon Peres, who said in a recent New Year's reception for Christian leaders a number of years ago, he says, today Jewish-Christian relationships in Israel, they are stronger than at any time in Jewish history. I want to quote the current Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, who repeatedly states that Jewish-Christian relationships are at a high. As a matter of fact, he says that evangelical Christians in particular around the world are Israel's best friend. So the relationships are strong and solid. But nevertheless, of course, I fully understand, and it is absolutely right to say that there are some challenges that we face here in Jerusalem, in particular in the Old City and some other communities in Haifa, and I want to address them briefly. Of course, we all are aware that in particular historic churches in Israel, they are facing challenges. These are spitting attack, harassments from mostly yeshiva students in the old cities, but also in Haifa against some of the Christian communities in Israel. There are attacks also against Messianic communities, that means Hebrew Christians that are living here in this land. And they are here and they are prevalent in Israel. However, it must be said that the status of Christians here in Israel is the best in the entire Middle East. There's no nation in the Middle East where Christians enjoy so much freedom, so much liberty to express their faith like here in the land of Israel. As a matter of fact, the numbers of Christians here in this land, it's the only country in the Middle East where the number of Christians are constantly increasing for many years. So it is indeed a safe place in spite of some of those attacks that I mentioned before. I want to mention, of course, also that even us as Christian Embassy, we faced challenges recently with new demonstrations that were taking out at the Pace Arena, not far from here, where we were were celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles. Now you need to understand the Christians that are coming, they are friends of Israel, and they were surprised to see this demonstrations against them. There was not far from here at the southern steps of the Temple Mount, not too long ago, a massive demonstrations against several hundred international guests that came to pray for the Jews, for the peace of Jerusalem. We saw similar demonstrations at King of Kings Assembly, not recently. So there is a new dynamic that is going on here in Israel, and many of us wonder, does this have anything to do with the new government, in particular with the new Minister of Security, Mr. Itamar Ben-Gvir, who comes from a very right-leaning radical party called Otzmat Yehudit. His best friend, Mr. Benzi Gopstein, he leads up an organization called Lehava, which is a very militant, hateful, anti-missionary organization here in Israel, and they were behind many of those protests that we witnessed. So we ask ourselves, is there maybe a change at the horizon where we have to be concerned, in particular paralleled also with a new challenge in regard to our visa? We decided to go brief shortly before the Feast of Tabernacles to the Israeli media. We approached that challenge publicly, and I have to tell you, we have been amazed by the outpouring of support from many, many different government ministries who contacted us, and he says they want to do everything to help us and to assure us that Christians know that they are welcome in the state of Israel. There is no government policy in place, they assured us, that is turning in any way against Christians. We also found that the visa challenges that we faced were not so much caused by antipathy against Christians living here in this land, but was a result of a continuous change of one government over to the next. We had over this last 3 years 5 different governments ruling this nation, so it was difficult to enact new policies also in regard to the visas. And so those challenges have been overcome, and we have been repeatedly been assured, even though of course Israel is a democratic country where people can voice their voice also in protests, we have been assured repeatedly that those protests against some of the Christians group have nothing to do with the policy of Israel. And also I've been assured by people living in the old city that Israel is working to calm down those protesters against Christian pilgrims in regard, in particular, the historic churches. And we are also dialoguing and talking to the police in the old city to enforce also this liberty, to make sure that Christians of all denominations will feel welcome in Israel. Of course, there's still much to be done and much can be improved, but the general attitude here in Israel, in particular from the government, is a very friendly attitude towards Christians. The question, of course, is what is the origin of those hostilities that we do see? And there were 3 very simple reasons. Number one, we do see, of course, a long-standing story of more than 1800 years of Christian anti-Semitism. Jewish people are very well aware of the pogroms, the Inquisitions, the Crusades, and just 80 years ago, the Holocaust that was squarely perpetrated against the Jewish people. So for many Jews, even today, they receive us as Christians, or perceive us as Christians, as a religion that is hostile to Judaism. Secondly, I believe it's also a lack of education in some of the yeshivas, where many of the students are not aware what Christians believe. They are not aware of the closeness of the Christian faith to the Jewish faith and our commonalities. And thirdly, of course, also is that some of the historic churches in particular that are located here in the land of Israel, they feel they are not really loyal to the state of Israel, but are more siding with the Palestinian population here in this land, and many are irritated that no stronger condemnations came out from Christian communities when women were raped and civilians have been massacred and people have been taken hostages over to Gaza. They did expect a stronger reaction, in particular from Christian churches that follow the teaching of Jesus. So these are the main reasons why you have those hostilities, and I believe after the war also it is something that we all need to revisit our stance with the Jewish people. Now Israel after the war will for sure be a different nation. The fabric of Israel will be changing dramatically. We will experience a major shift towards the political right, in particular, not so much from the religious groups that are already more
Okay, apparently we've unfortunately had to cut off the video. So next I would like to invite Director General Peter Kovacs up to the stage, please. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm supposed to have a PowerPoint presentation. Can I have it? This one. All right. So thank you very much and welcome everyone. First of all, please let me tell you what this presentation is not about. This is not about giving you a full picture about what is the situation of the Christians now in the shadow of the Gaza war in Palestine, including the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem, because I'm not a field expert, neither a researcher. And on this current slide, this is the first and last historical fact that I wanted to bring to you. The only historical fact which I would like to talk about is that in the beginning of the 20th century, approximately 15-20% of the population in Palestine, let's call this whole area Palestine, as it was a part of the Ottoman Empire, was a 15-20%, and now it's approximately 1% only. So I told you it's not. So this presentation is not trying to give you a full picture, neither historical data, because there are much more expert scientists on the field. But I tried is to collect information about the current situation, especially reports of Hungarian diplomats who are serving in the Holy Land in Israel and also for the Palestinian authorities in Ramallah. We also have some partners, especially local churches in Palestine and in Israel. And we have also a lot of NGO partners, including Aid for the Church in Need, SOS Chrétien d'Orient, L'Œuvre d'Orient, French organization. I didn't listed all of them. But so I'm just trying to say that the information which I will have are very fragmented. So these are just more fragments of the big picture. And although I believe this information are trustworthy, then please handle them with criticism. And if you have more accurate data, then during the panel discussion, we can discuss them. So, all right. Just an overview where the Christians live in the Gaza Strip. So on the left side, you see a map, and the northern Gaza Strip is red. Is because there is a separation line now in the Gaza Strip, which is an east-west separation line. The northern part is the one which is the evacuation zone. And from the evacuation zone, the evacuation area, the Palestinian population is expected to move to the south. The evacuation line is listed with yellow, and that's the so-called Salahaddin Road in the Gaza Strip. So that's the line where the people should be evacuated, and in the north, the Christians live. On the left side, you see two churches, which I listed. Both of them have been bombed. The right one, which is the St. Porphyrios church, has been destroyed. Approximately 1,100 Christians live in the Gaza Strip. They are local population, so they are not foreigners, and they were not allowed to leave the Gaza Strip yet. And according to our latest information, which is coming from the last week, they stayed in the evacuation area. As I mentioned, the St. Porphyrius Church has been destroyed. On the left side, you see the church, how it looked before the 19th of October. On the right side, you see how it looks now. And also, there is one school which has been bombed. It's proven that it's bombed by the Israeli army. Before the war, 1,250 students went to this school, Christians and non-Christians. The manager body of the school is the Latin Patriarchate, which is basically the biggest school running authority besides the local government. And it was very important for them to educate both Christians and non-Christians together. The school have been bombed. That time, it didn't function as a school. It was on the 17th of October. It was rather a shelter. And also, there is the hospital, the Al-Akhli Anglican Hospital, which is an Anglican Baptist Episcopal hospital, but definitely it's a church-run hospital. It was also bombed. Our diplomats talked to the Archbishop and, well, actually Cardinal now, Cardinal Pizzaballa, and he is aware, unfortunately, that in the immediate vicinity of the school, the church-running facilities, there are Hamas tunnels. They have known it before the war broke up because there was some reconstructions before, and the local authorities raised some obstacles for the reconstruction. Most likely it was because of the tunnels, but still the church couldn't do anything with that. Also in the Gaza Strip, what the people now experience, one is the wartime inflation. In Hungary, we also say that we have wartime inflation because of the, as a result of the Ukraine-Russian war. But this is really wartime inflation because there is a lack of goods. So if somebody wants to have some food or somebody wants to buy anything, the price raise extraordinary. There is also lack of food, as I mentioned, and lack of gas. Just, I would like to refer back to the evacuation. Just imagine that people have to leave from northern Gaza to South Gaza, but no civilian cars are running at the moment in the Gaza Strip because there is no gas. And just imagine also that you can bring your suitcases. You can bring only very limited amount of stuff with you because maybe on the next day your house will be bombed. And how can you do the evacuation without having a car and without having gas in it? And nevertheless, just imagine that there is an evacuation line, but on the right side and the left side from the evacuation road, there are fights between the Israeli army and Hamas. There is no ceasefire, as we know, but there is some humanitarian suspension of military activities, but very often they experience that both sides don't really keep it. That's for Gaza. I also would like to share some experience from the West Bank. The Christians in the West Bank mainly work in agriculture, education, tourism, and the social sector. But in the West Bank currently, there are checkpoints, Israeli checkpoints, which cannot be really crossed by the Christians. In the West Bank, by the way, I didn't bring a map now, but if you imagine the West Bank, on the north there is Nablus and Ramallah. In Nablus, basically there are no Christians, or only very few. In Ramallah there are a few families. Most Christian families live in either East Jerusalem, approximately 10,000 people of East Jerusalem, and the rest are in the neighborhood of Bethlehem, Beit-Jala. So altogether in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, approximately 45,000 Christians live. Approximately 4,800 people worked in the tourism who lost their jobs. 80% of them are Christians. I got this data last week, so since then some other things could happen. And just imagine that if we are talking about 45,000 people, 45,000 Christians in the West Bank, if you make a quick calculation, approximately 4,000 are Christians who lost their jobs in the tourism sector. 4,000 people who work equals to 10,000 people for the whole family, 10,000, 15,000 maybe, which is 20-25% of the whole population, whole Christian population in Palestine. And only it's the tourism sector. There is also olive harvest. This is olive harvesting time now. A lot of Christians work in the olive fields. And if they cannot go to work and if they cannot harvest the olive, then they are not going to be able to produce their oil. There is one effect which we didn't see coming, but it came. And it's a new type of cooperation between the Christian denominations. Before that, whoever had some contacts in the Middle East, in the Christian churches, denominations, you could see that there are a lot of differences between the different denominations. But now what we see is that finally the Christians can cooperate, which is a, let's say, rather positive effect of all the negative things which we experience. On the left side, it's a statement on the recent events in the Armenian Quarter from Patriarch Pizzaballa, which means that the Latins started to raise their voices in favor of the Armenians. I know that after me, there will be an Armenian priest speaking, if he's here. I hope that he's going to share more information about this. And on the right side, another interesting picture where the Greek Orthodox Patriarch, the Canterbury Archbishop, and Pier Battista Pizzaballa, who is the Latin Cardinal and Archbishop, was in the same picture. This was the apostolic visit of the Archbishop of Canterbury in the Holy Land after the Gaza War broke up. As far as I know, it was planned before, but this Gaza War gave it a very special importance that the Archbishop was able to visit the Holy Land and express his concerns and his condolences. Just one last thing, which we very often forget, it's about Lebanon, because Lebanon is also influenced in this war, especially the South Lebanon, where there are military operations between Hezbollah and the Israeli forces. And on the 20th of November, on Monday, one church have been not destroyed but heavily injured in the fight when these two groups, armies, the Israeli army and the Hezbollah as a terrorist group, started to fight. I don't have the information who targeted and got this church, but definitely it injures heavily. But what is more important, that approximately 15 to 20,000 Christians was forced to leave South Lebanon, and they escaped to the northern part of Lebanon or to the middle, to Beirut. So the local churches, including the Maronites, including even the Baptists, and everyone try to help these people now. And they are planning to move back, and we are waiting for the time when they will be able to. And as a last slide, I just wanted to show you that the organization which I represent, the Hungary HS Agency, which is the governmental organization for international development and humanitarian aid, we spent almost $1 million USD to date on the Holy Land, supporting Christians, especially in the educational sector. Why is it important? It's important because in the education institute schools of the Christian churches receive also non-Christian students. Actually, in many cases, they have much more non-Christian students than Christian students. And we see that through education, they can reach these people and teach them to peace and the peaceful coexistence of the different groups of people, Muslims, Christians, Jews, is the key factor of stability of the Holy Land. So this is what we are trying to support. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kovacs. Next, I would like to invite up Professor Tbar GRL. Sir, thank you very much.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for the invitation. I will speak about the ancient roots of the Christian-Jewish relationship in the Holy Land. Tacitus, one of the greatest historians of Rome ever, published his Annals in 117. He mentions Christianity in the context of an event which happened more than 50 years earlier, the burning of Rome in 64 AD. It reads as follows: Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilatus, and the most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. I think it is clear from the above that Tacitus, a blue-blooded Roman aristocrat, had no sympathy either for Christians or Jews, and that is putting it mildly. However, it is also clear that he had a fairly accurate knowledge of the birth of Christianity. This new religious movement, founded by Christ, was born in Judea, in the province that came under direct Roman rule in 6 AD. Since it was originally a Jewish sect, first Christians were predominantly Jewish in origin, as evidenced by the famous graffito discovered in Pedagogium in Rome. The deity crucified on a cross with the head of an ass, to whom Alexamenos prays, is, of course, the Jewish Jesus. According to a very old anti-Semitic prejudice, dating back to the Hellenistic era, Jews worship a donkey-headed deity in their temple. We are informed by Tertullian that Romans spread the same propaganda about Christians. I'm sorry. I forgot to change my glasses. Okay. Notwithstanding, the relationship between Christianity and Judaism is fraught with contradictions, both in Judea and in the diaspora. Although Rabban Gamaliel asked the Sanhedrin for tolerance toward Christians, this doesn't seem to have been applied for long. According to the Acts of Apostles, Stephanos, or Saint Stephen, was a deacon in the early church at Jerusalem who angered members of various synagogues by his teachings. Accused of blasphemy at his trial, at his trial, he made a speech denouncing the Jewish authorities who were sitting in judgment on him and was then stoned to death. Saul of Tarsus, later known as Paul the Apostle, a Pharisee and Roman citizen, participated in Stephen's execution in circa 34 AD. Almost 3 decades later, James the Just, brother of Jesus Christ, who was the leader of the church in Jerusalem, was also stoned to death by the Pharisees in order of the high priest Ananus ben Ananus in AD 62. This even shocked contemporary Jewry so much that even Flavius Josephus, the former rebel leader and later official historian of the Flavian house, remembered in his work Antiquitates of the Jews this terrible murder, and modern scholarship has almost universally acknowledged the authenticity of this reference. Judea was under Roman occupation during the formative period of Christianity. Since Jesus was not accepted as savior by the religious establishment and the majority of the Jews in Judea, it was believed that the fulfillment of the messianic prophecies was still to come. This was the case for the Pharisees, Essenes, and especially the Zealots, but not for the Sadducees, who probably got along well with the Romans. Jesus had predicted the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem. "Look, your house is left to you desolate," which must have been a clear message to his followers. During the First Jewish War, the Romans did indeed destroy the temple and the whole Jerusalem in 70 AD, which has had consequences for Judaism as a religious system to this day. Although the Jews were not yet banned from the capital, the whole country was confiscated as public land, ager publicus, and sold off. Jews, regardless of sex, age, or status, were taxed 2 drachmas a year, which they had to pay into a special treasury called Fiscus Judaicus. According to church tradition, which we read about in detail in Eusebius, the Christians didn't take part in this war, but fled to Pella, a city in the Decapolis, in obedience to Jesus' prophecy. I quote, "When you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, let those in the city get out, and let those in the country not enter the city." End of quote. We know of 2 more successive wars fought by the Jews against the Romans. The Diaspora War, or War of Quietus, lasted between 115 to 117, but we do not know whether Christians were involved. However, Christians were not allowed to take part in the last great war, the Bar Kokhba uprising, between 132 and 136 AD. Even though Arabs and Samaritans were fighting for the liberation of Jerusalem, according to the Christian tradition, Bar Kokhba's troops persecuted Christians living in Judea. The oppression of the revolt had even more serious consequences. Hundreds of thousands of Jews died or were deported to far corners of the imperium, and the country was almost completely destroyed. Jerusalem and Judea were also stripped of their name. The former was renamed Aelia Capitolina, the latter Syria Palestina. Jews were banned from Jerusalem under penalty of death. The surviving Jewish population moved to the north, where religious life gradually resumed. The Patriarchate, which emerged around the turn of the 3rd century under the leadership of Rabbi Judah I, had the support of the Severan dynasty. The testimony of Origen, who lived in Caesarea, views the function of the Jewish patriarch as that of a king, enjoying, among many other privileges, the power of capital punishment. The Tannaim, or teachers or repeaters, were the rabbinic sages whose views are recorded in the Mishnah from approximately 10 to 220 AD. Several rabbinic academies were established. The first at Yavne, which was the place of decisive debates about the canonicity of certain biblical books. It was Yavne that inspired and sanctioned the new Greek language version of the Bible, the Aquila of Sinope. The events that preceded and followed by the Bar Kokhba uprising resulted in the decay and death of the school at Yavne. the Sanhedrin was removed from Yavne to Usha, and from here finally arrived at Tiberias. This process indicates the ultimate spiritual supremacy of Galilee over Judea, the latter having become depopulated by the War of Hadrian. Meanwhile, Christian intellectuals used the dispersion of the Jews and the ban on their living in Jerusalem and Judea as evidence of the collective guilt of God's original chosen people, and even as direct evidence for proving that Jesus is the Messiah. Although Justin Martyr was born around 90 or 100 AD into a Greek family at Flavia Neapolis, today Nablus, near the ancient biblical city of Shechem, he knew little or no Hebrew and Aramaic and had only a passing acquaintance with Judaism. For Justin Martyr, the historical proof of the truth and fulfillment of the prophecy is the Churban of 70. I quote, that the land of the Jews then was to be laid waste. Here, what was said by the spirit of prophecy, and he here quotes Isaiah chapter 64, and you are convinced that Jerusalem has been laid waste, as was predicted, and concerning its desolation, and that no one should be permitted to inhabit in, and the death is decreed against the Jew apprehended entering it, you know very well. Justin's dialogue with Trypho is unique in that he provides information on tensions between Jews and Gentile believers in Jesus of the 2nd century. He speaks of the Jews who have anathematized and do anathematize this very Christ in the synagogues. Justin is certainly referring to the Amida prayer, also called the Shemone Esrei, or 19, point 12 of which was the curse pronounced on the heretics, Birkat Haminim, asking God to destroy those in heretical sects who slander Jews. The version of the Jerusalem Talmud found in the Cairo Geniza proved that this curse was originally directed against the Christians. I quote, may the Nazarenes, Hanotzrim, and the sectarians, Minim, perish as in a moment. End of quote. The early Palestinian rabbinic attitude is also expressed on Tosefta Hulin and paralleled in Babylonian Talmud Avodah Zarah, which forbid Jews to have contact with followers of Jesus. I skip here. After the oppression of the Bar Kokhba revolt, the demographic composition of Judea-Palestina has also changed. By circa 120 AD, 2 complete legions were already stationed in the country, one in Jerusalem, other on the border of Galilee and Samaria, and several auxiliary troops were deployed. A good proportion of the soldiers who discharged from these units, military diplomas prove it, settled in the country. Archaeological evidence indicates a mix of Roman veterans and migrants from western parts of the empire who settled in Aelia Capitolina, its surroundings, administrative centers, and along the main roads, as well as immigrants from the coastal plain and neighboring provinces such as Arabia, Syria, and Phoenicia who settled in the countryside. New pagan colonies were founded in Judea at Eleuteropolis, which is Beit Jibrin, Diospolis, which is Lydda, and Nicopolis, which is Emmaus. By 300 AD, Jews formed only a quarter of the population and lived in compact settlements in Galilee. By the 5th century, Christianity had gained further ground among the population and Christians formed a majority in Palestine. This demographic change, of course, has had major religious and cultural consequences. Pagans brought their own culture, temples, altars, statues, as well as entertainment centers, 13 theaters, 9 circuses, and 4 amphitheaters, and numerous public baths were built across the country. At the same time, Christianity with a pagan background also became stronger since great many soldiers already professed the new faith. It is no coincidence that the oldest known Christian church in the world was found in Megiddo, in the area of the 2nd Legionary Camp at Kefar Otnai, which is Legio. In 2005, the Israeli archaeologist Yotam Teper of the Tel Aviv University discovered the remains of the so-called Megiddo church, dated to circa 230 AD, a time when Christians were still persecuted in the Roman Empire. On one of the Greek dedicatory inscriptions of the 54 square meter large mosaic mentions a Roman centurion, Gaianus, who donated his own money to have the mosaic made. The massive Christianization of the Holy Land begins with the activities of Constantine the Great and his mother Helena between 326 and 328. According to Eusebius, who records the details of her pilgrimage to Palestine and other eastern provinces, she was responsible for the construction of beautification of the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem and the Church of Eleona on the Mount of Olives, sites of Christ's birth and ascension, respectively. In Jerusalem, she destroyed the Temple of Venus, which Hadrian had deliberately built over Golgotha, and ordered the building of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. In parallel with the process of Christianization, the building of new synagogues and the renovation of old ones were forbidden by law from the 4th century onwards. Nevertheless, the laws could hardly be effective. In Capernaum, for instance, which has been referred as a Christian holy place in the rabbinic sources and by the 4th century was predominantly inhabited by Christians, a relatively large Jewish synagogue was built in the early 5th century. Archaeologist Jody Magnus has suggested on the basis of numismatic and ceramic evidence that virtually all Galilean synagogues should be dated to the 5th century. In addition, the Capernaum synagogue rises almost directly next to the early Byzantine basilica, which, according to Christian tradition and archaeological finds, was built over the house of the Apostle Peter. However, at the end of the 4th century and in the first half of the 5th century, the relationship between Jews and Christians was not always peaceful. Between the end of the 4th until the end of the 6th century, several attacks are being reported against Jewish synagogues across the Roman Empire, from Tipasa, Numidia, to Kalinikon, Mesopotamia. In Palestine, one of the most notorious examples is the rampage instigated by the Syrian monk Bar Sauma, later bishop of Nisibis, who, together with his supporters, attacked and destroyed several synagogues in the early 5th century. In 438, Bar Sauma and 40 of his followers attacked Jews praying at the ruins of the temple in Jerusalem, killing many. Tense relations between some local Christian and Jewish communities are reflected in the recurring imperial edicts that forbade attacks against Christians and the destruction of their synagogues in the Codex Theodosianus. Needless to say, these laws have been equally ineffective. In earlier scholarship, the development of Christianity in the 1st centuries AD had often been seen in the light of the so-called parting of the ways model. In reality, there were blurred boundaries between Jewish and Christian communities is also expressed in the decisions of many ecclesiastical councils that tried to prohibit the interaction of Christians, even clergy, with their neighboring Jewish communities. For instance, mixed marriages and sexual relations between Christians and Jews were prohibited already in the Synod of Elvira in 306. But the appearance of this theme in later imperial legislation shows that the persistence of these relationships, despite increasing public pressure against them. Tanaitic sources also prohibit social and sexual intercourse with minim, forbid their food and drink, and label their children as mamzerim, or illegitimate. These sources also forbid doing business and conversing with minim, as well as teaching their children a trade. These decrees on both sides show just how unsuccessful the separation of Jews and Christians was in real life. Not only did Christians occasionally visit synagogues, but even rabbis could flirt with Christian doctrine. The most famous and often cited example is the story of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanos' arrest and later release. He was suspected of heresy, which in this case most probably meant contacts with some sort of Christians at Sepphoris. There have emerged two quite opposite ways to envision Jewish-Christian relations in the Holy Land. Mordechai Aviam emphasizes the strict boundaries between Jewish and Christian areas of settlements and interprets the available evidence in light of Jewish-Christian conflict or Jewish-Christian antagonism. Recent scholarship dealing with Jewish and Christian relations in the ancient world suggests, however, that these relations were not only characterized by conflict and mutual hostility. This recent scholarly trend lends support to Eric Meyer's last sentence, who sees, this recent scholarly trend lends support to Eric Meyers, who sees Jewish and Christian communities as living side by side with each other, and remarks that we would be making a great mistake if we were to think of Jews and Christians only as enemies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, might need that. Thank you very much, Professor. And finally, I would like to invite Mr. Peter Morvai up to the stand, sir. Thank you.
Dear distinguished guests and organizers of the conference, thank you for the invitation. Yesterday, it was so wonderful to see the pictures of the two little Hungarian-Israeli girls, Ella and Daphne, hugging their mother, Mayan, for the first time in 50 days after the Simchat Torah massacre. My colleague, assistant editor-in-chief of HETEC, Máté Kulifai, contacted Mayan for the first time from Hungary, and he met her afterwards in Israel. She got just one picture of the girls from Gaza, showing that they are alive, but no other news. Mayan asked our readers to keep up the memory of the children, helping not to get it fade during the long weeks of waiting. We prayed and hoped for their return as well, we pray and hope for the safe return of the other hostages taken by the terrorists. As a journalist, I had the privilege to visit Israel for the first time exactly 30 years ago. It was a memorable journey just a few years after the re-establishment of the diplomatic relations between Hungary and the State of Israel. These years seemed to be an era of new beginnings in both countries. In Hungary, after the fall of communism, we had been looking forward to start a new chapter in our 1,000-year-old history, including opening up a friendly relationship towards Israel in the Middle East, where more than 200,000 Hungarian-born citizens and their families are living. And in Israel, we could feel not only the natural Israeli optimism, but also the hope for a new beginning after the signing of the Oslo agreements in Washington that offered a timetable to solve the Israeli-Arab conflict, including the most difficult issues like the permanent status of Jerusalem. We remember we have been promised that even after even the final status agreement will be settled by not later than the end of this century. I mean the end of the last century, not the next one. Many visits have followed that first one in 1993. Some have been really uplifting, especially the big conference called Jerusalem We Forget You Not, that Hungarian and German Christians organized for 5,000 participants, commemorating the 3,000th anniversary of Jerusalem as the capital of the ancient Jewish state, and to call for the international recognition of Jerusalem as the eternal and undividable capital of the modern state of Israel. And here I want to thank the organizers of this conference for including Dr. Jürgen Bühler and me in the same panel, at least virtually, not only because we know each other very well, but also because I remember that we have been inspired by the vision of the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem that was founded by the late Johann Lückhoff in 1980. It was the same year that the Israeli Knesset passed the basic law to officially declare Jerusalem as the eternal and undividable capital of Israel. There followed a total international rejection of the decision. The UN Security Council condemned it as well and ruled the law null and void in its resolution 478. And this is just one of the total 226 resolutions adopted by the UN Security Council against Israel, not to speak of the countless other votes and statements of the General Assembly, the Human Rights Council, and other international bodies. Some years ago, I had the honor to translate the former Israeli UN ambassador Doris Gold's great book on the issue, The Fight for Jerusalem, into Hungarian. And Ambassador Gold fittingly called the UN as the modern Tower of Babel. Regrettably, no nations, including the United States, the strongest ally of Israel, acknowledged Jerusalem at that time. However, a group of Dutch, German, and South African evangelical Christian pastors and activists decided to establish the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, as a declaration that Christians should honor the Bible in this respect as well. No other city has ever been mentioned in the Bible as the capital of Israel, only Jerusalem, since King David captured the city, and no other country as the land of Israel, only Eretz Israel. And thanks to President Trump, who made the right decision to move the American embassy to Jerusalem, now we can see that nations start slowly accept the historical and national truth, including Hungary, that has recently opened a diplomatic commercial department in Jerusalem. Hopefully the moving of the embassy will soon follow. There were other memorable visits as well. In 2004, I had the privilege to accompany the founder and senior pastor of Faith Church, the largest European evangelical Christian church, Reverend Sándor Németh, to Jerusalem. Pastor Németh had been invited by the late Benny Elon, who served as tourism minister at that time. Minister Elon had also Hungarian origins, and he was from the city of Papa. And I remember that he greeted us in his Jerusalem office, saying in Hungarian that I am a boy from Papa. He explained that he would like to create an alliance of European Christian friends of Israel, including pastors, politicians, public figures, and activists. From the members of national parliaments, parliamentary caucuses would be formed, he explained. Pastor Németh told Mr. Elon that he thinks that Bible-believing Christians should abandon the so-called replacement theology of the Roman Catholic Church and of some Protestant denominations. Instead, Christians should heed to the promise and warning that God has given to Abraham, saying, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. They agreed, and it was the beginning of the Israel Alliance Foundation that operates today in dozens of parliaments in European countries, including Hungary, and in other parts of the world. The annual list of top 50 Christian friends of Israel that regularly appears during the Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem Post is published by Israeli Alliance Foundation, led today by Chairman Josh Reinstein. It was during this visit that Minister Elon organized a tour for us at Ir David, the city of David. This archaeological site of the ancient Jerusalem had been fairly unknown even for Israelis at that time. By the way, the young historian who guided us through the tombs of the kings, the Ezekiel tunnel, and the Siloam pool was Major Doron Spielman, who is currently serving in reserves as an IDF international spokesman in Israel's Swords of Iron war with Hamas. We have agreed with Mr. Elon that Hungarian Christians would visit the city of David and other sites as well that are deeply connected to the history of the Jewish people in the land, such as the ancient Tel Shiloh and Hebron. Educational and academic programs have also been started to inform Christians and non-Christians alike about the unbroken continuity of the Jewish history connecting the biblical and the modern Israel. But Professor Grill is a much more relevant expert about these programs. You may ask, as many people do ask, that why are certain Christians, evangelical, Pentecostals, and other denominations are so interested in supporting Israel? Okay, they don't believe in the replacement theology that teaches that false doctrine that God has rejected the Jewish people because they killed Jesus and transferred all the biblical promises of the patriarch and the prophets to the church. This is nice, but don't they have a special agenda that requires the Jewish state maybe as a springboard to jump to the next stage in the end-time prophecies? Don't they believe that there should be an Armageddon war before the millennial kingdom, and they want to speed it up in some way? What do these Christian Zionists want? Since we know that Zionism is a movement of the Jewish people returning to their ancient homeland. Not even all Jews agree with it, but what do Christians do with it? Do they also want to move to Israel? That would be a national disaster, as there are 2 billion Christians all over the world. That's an even bigger number than the global Muslim population. And we know that many of them really want to take the land from the river to the sea, as they like to chant with those anti-Zionists, or to say in less PC way, with those Jew-hating, anti-Semitic, useful idiot Westerners like Roger Waters or Greta Thunberg, just to name a few of the many. I think that these are relevant worries. Sometimes Christians really behave in an embarrassing way, as if they have an identity problem and are not able to decide who really they want to be, Christians or Jews. We might call it a religious gender issue, but maybe that would lead us too far. However, it is fair to say that Christian Zionism is a controversial expression that is difficult to define. But regardless the name tag, it is undeniable that some Bible scholars or Bible-reading laymen discovered from scriptures that there should be a return of the Jewish people to the land and boldly proclaimed it. Some of them were very prominent people, like US President John Adams, who wrote in 1818, "I really wish the Jews again in Judea an independent nation." Or George Bush, not one of the presidents, but the old George Bush, a professor of the Hebrew language at the New York University and the cousin of an ancestor of the President Bush, who published a book titled The Valley of Vision, or The Dry Bones of Israel Revived. Or we might mention the author Herman Melville, who expressed this idea in a poem on pilgrimage in the Holy Land, that was the title, with these words: "The Hebrew seers announced in time the return of Judah to her prime." And there were archaeologists, mostly unprofessional amateurs of the 19th century, who started to dig up Jerusalem, looking also for the proofs of the Bible and of the Jewish history. We might say these people had been Zionists before Theodor Herzl. Yes, some of them believed that the Jews would eventually become Christians after the return, or believed that this or that nation is one of the 10 lost tribes, and had other strange ideas. But many of them loved the Jewish people genuinely and without any self-interest. And they were right in this hope, as the birth of the State of Israel in 1948 and the unification of Jerusalem after the Six-Day War became the final nails in the coffin of the old replacement theology. These historic events proved clearly that the ancient promises and prophecies are still valid for the Jewish people. As a result, today there are tens of millions of Christians all over the world, not only in the States, but in Latin America, Southeast Asia, and even in the tiny oceanic island nations that are so committed to vote for Israel in the UN, who love Israel. These Christians support Israel. They visit Israel. They defend Israel on the social platforms that are the frontline battlefields today. And there are a lot of Jewish people, both in Israel and in the diaspora, who realize that they have an alliance and a true friendship with these Christians, as we could see in the recent weeks after the bloody and barbaric pogrom on Simchat Torah. A moving demonstration was held just 3 days after the massacre at the bank of the Danube in Budapest at the Shoe Memorial of the Jews shot to death to the river during the last months of the Shoah. And yes, we have a common enemy. The jihadists, the radical Islam, wants to annihilate Jews and the Christians in order to create a global caliphate. And that's why we need each other, even if we have different approaches in certain questions. But there are much more that connects us, and I'm really thankful for this conference in Budapest, because this is exactly such a forum for strengthening these bonds that unite us. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morvai. Before we begin our questions, I would like to note that last week the Armenian Church did recently experience another attack by settlers, and we are very sorry that Father Agan could not be here to discuss the situation with us. But in the spirit of the last panel, I'd like to first open it up to the audience for questions before I follow with one of my own. Does anybody want to start us off with a question?
Thank you. You mentioned that the presence of the Christians in what is now Israel was 15-20% in the Turkish rule. before this war or whatever, which is now we are discussing, it was less than 5%. What was the reason for it? Were they killed, forced to exile, or overpopulation, or what? Thank you.
You hear me? Good. So mostly what we see is mainly two reasons. One of them is that during the Ottoman times, this place was never peaceful. But since the Ottoman Empire fell, there were a lot of wars, there were a lot of atrocities against Christians, but not only against Christians, but also between Jews and Muslims, but Christians always in the crossfire. So that just, if they had a chance to leave, then they left. So that's one thing. The other thing is the demography. Normally in Christian families, there are less children than in the Muslim families. So that's the other reason. The Christian families very often act like typical European families, and the Muslim families are rather the Eastern families, the bigger families with more children. So that's the reason. But it's also very important and interesting fact that in a in one presentation we heard that 180,000 Christians live in Israel, while only less than 50,000 Christians live in Palestine. So approximately 4 times more Christians live in Israel currently than in Palestine. Thank you.
Just a little point to demonstrate the complexity of the situation between religions, between Jews, especially between Orthodox Jews and Christians in Israel, is with a remark to Mr. Morvai's presentation about Minister Benny Elon, because this minister, Benny Elon, is a practicing Orthodox Jew. He's also a settler. He's also a right-wing person. So in theory, you might expect that he will be against Christians in Israel, but the fact was the opposite, because he was not only encouraging your group, but he was actually organizing all the pro-Israeli Christian groups working all around the world. So the fact that an Orthodox Jew and a settler and a right wing will be so cooperative with people who are religiously opposite to his views on how a person should behave shows how complex this situation is, and how we shouldn't judge a person only by his title, by the fact that he's an Orthodox Jew, by the fact that he's practicing Judaism, by the fact that he is right-wing, by the fact that he's a settler. So, in fact, he could be very friendly with many people who have different beliefs than himself. So, thank you.
May I?
Yes, of course.
Yes, I do agree that, and I think it is a very promising sign that people who would, if you just read the newspapers, it would look like they are sitting on the different sides of the table, but still they are able to find common courses, and today. It is the case after the October 7 massacre that we can see that in Europe, for example, just like the elections in the Netherlands, there was a reaction from the voters that they supported politicians who I know have been regarded and written about, even in Israel, just like an extreme right-wing problematic figure. But still, he's speaking something, he's speaking very, very friendly about Israel, not only now, but for decades. I know Geert Wilders for a long time, and I know that he's been sacrificing practically all of his life for the mission he does, and people reacted to that. So I think we should not judge by the mainstream media or by the old categories. And just to give another example, there's been we have been talking about the Christians living in Israel and in the territories. Unfortunately, many of them are anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, and we could see that the old replacement theology has been fading away. But instead of that, there has been a new replacement theology, the Palestinianism, which teaches that Israel has no historical roots to the land, has no historical roots to Jerusalem, even not to the Temple Mount. And we can see it in the international bodies that UNESCO regularly publishes papers that forget to mention any Jewish connections to the Temple Mount. Of course, you're from Jerusalem, you know it very, very well. Just to explain that, and unfortunately, many of the Arab Christians just shared those views. So I agree with you. The situation is very complex. We should not be quick to draw conclusions. We should focus on the people and on the message and on the actions.
Okay, thank you. I think that Dr. Katz highlighted a very important point that we Europeans, Westerns, try to simplify everything because that's easier to make an image of what is going on in the Middle East. But sometimes we are very far from the truth when we try to do this simplification, that things are much more complex. I can give you one personal example, not from Israel or Palestine, but from the neighborhood Syria. There is a small town which is called Kara, very close to Homs. It's on the highway between Damascus and Homs. The village is Sunni. The town village, so it's a small settlement, it's Sunni. And it has a Christian monastery, a very international Christian monastery. And the highway where this small town or small village is situated was the front line between al-Nusra and Daesh during the Syrian war. And they fought each other. And in the front line, there was a Sunni village with a Christian monastery. And Daesh wanted to occupy this monastery more than 2 or 3 times. And the reason why they couldn't do that is because the Sunni inhabitants of the village defended the monastery from Daesh. So it was my first experience. And when I entered the monastery, they showed me around. We went to the main yard, and they showed me one corner on the wall where I shouldn't take pictures too. And I asked why, and Peter, look at the armed people there. I looked at and yeah, they were armed people with machine guns. And I was like, okay, but who are these people in the monastery? And they are Hezbollah. Okay, and what does Hezbollah do in the monastery? Oh, they are defending the monastery. The reason why I told this story is because it shows that in the Middle East everything is complicated, and what with our European logic try to understand about what is going on there, then we usually fail. And this failure is very dangerous because very often our politicians, our decision makers fail also to understand what is going on. And when they think that they know the solution and they try to force different parties to follow their solutions, they couldn't make bigger mistake than this, because usually they just lead to a much bigger disaster. So therefore, I think it's very important to study more this complexity, to understand that it's not black and white. So there are labeled Orthodox Jews who are with the Christians, and there are Arabs who are Christians. It must be said in Europe, because very often I have this experience that people didn't know that Christian Arabs are existing. So that's important. Okay, we know, but the general public doesn't know that. And we need to understand what is going on. We need to understand there are different kinds of people with different interests, with different values. Sometimes it's a big mixture and it's not crystal clear what is going on. But this type of conferences like we have now, they are big steps towards this.
In regards to a step towards understanding, I would like to actually add in a question of my own to the whole panel. When it comes to the history, as we've seen from your presentations, this has been an ongoing dynamic in the Jewish-Christian relationship, but it's just recent that this hostility has manifested. What has caused that, do you think?
It's a question from everyone.
Maybe I should rephrase it. Has it been the war in Gaza that has created the renewed tensions, that has created these flare-ups with regards to attacks against Christian symbols or harassment of Christians on the street, do you think?
I don't have the information that it's that there is a special hostility against Christians. So, as I mentioned, the Christians are in crossfire. They are definitely don't belong to the major Muslim population, although they are Arabs in the Gaza Strip. Currently, they are victims of the Israeli bombings. So that's the fact. And definitely when the war ends, they all will leave the Gaza Strip if they can. So this is the last chapter of the Christianity in the Gaza Strip. It doesn't matter if there is any special hostility against them or not, they will not stay.
Well, I'm a historian, not a politician, not a journalist. I can tell you some things about Gaza in the 5th, 6th, 7th century, but I'm not very well informed about these days.
I would just like to get it mentioned that Rabbi Oberlander, I think rightfully said that these atrocities that we could see, for example, during the autumn holidays in Jerusalem, represent even not a fringe of the of certain traditions, but certain people. So I think atrocities happened. I also think that sometimes there are insensitivity on the side of the Christian pilgrims in Jerusalem. Sometimes they just not taking into account that they are visiting not only in the footsteps of Jesus, but also they are visiting the current state of Israel with all its history connected to the Bible. So that's what I wanted to refer in my address, that this is something that we would like to, and many Christians all over the world want to emphasize, that when visiting Israel, it should be an interest in the history, in the Bible, and in the current return of the Jews to the ancient land, and support all of these trends.
All right, and on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of this panel. We'll now have a 15-minute break, and we will continue with the third panel at 5:30 p.m. Thank you very much.